The restaurant fell completely silent when the shy waitress reached for a pen and began moving her hands in the air. At first, everyone thought she was simply nervous. Then the elderly woman across the table suddenly stopped trembling, stared at the waitress with wide, tearful eyes, and smiled for the first time in months. The billionaire's son watching from the other side of the room had no idea that, in the next few minutes, the woman he had hired to serve his mother would uncover a secret that would change all three of their lives forever. If you believe that kindness can give people a second chance when the world has forgotten them, take a moment to like this story, share it with someone who needs hope today, leave a comment, and subscribe to Kindness Legacy for more emotional stories about kindness, courage, and unexpected second chances. It was a bright Tuesday afternoon when 24-year-old Maricel Vane walked into the most elegant restaurant in the city wearing a borrowed black vest, a white blouse that was slightly too large for her, and shoes that had already begun to hurt her feet. Sunlight poured through the tall windows of the restaurant, reflecting against crystal glasses and polished silverware. Everything looked expensive, perfect, and far beyond the world Maricel had known. She had applied for the waitress position because her rent was 3 weeks overdue, her younger brother needed school supplies, and the small apartment she shared with him had begun to feel like a countdown to eviction. Maricel was naturally shy, the kind of person who apologized when someone else bumped into her, but she had learned that life did not always reward quiet people. Sometimes, survival required walking into places that frightened you and pretending you belonged there. Her first few hours were exhausting. She carried trays carefully, memorized complicated orders, and tried not to let anyone notice how badly her hands shook. Most customers barely looked at her. A few snapped their fingers for attention. One wealthy businessman complained that she was too slow even though she had been serving 3 tables at once. Maricel swallowed every insult because she needed the job. Then, shortly after 3 in the afternoon, a black luxury sedan stopped outside the restaurant. The atmosphere changed immediately. The manager hurried toward the entrance, straightening his jacket. Everyone knew who had arrived. Cashin Vale, one of the youngest billionaires in the country, had reserved the private dining room for his mother, Lady Serafina Vale. Cashin was famous for his wealth, his ruthless business decisions, and his almost frightening control over his emotions. Newspapers called him cold. Business magazines called him brilliant. People who had met him personally said he was impossible to impress. But there was one thing nobody talked about as much. His mother was deaf. Serafina had lost most of her hearing after a severe illness several years earlier. She could read lips to some degree, but crowded restaurants overwhelmed her. She hated being treated like she was fragile, and she hated watching people speak loudly and slowly to her as if deafness meant she could not understand anything else about the world. Since losing her husband, she had become increasingly isolated. Cashin had hired assistants, caregivers, and private companions, but none stayed long. Some became impatient. Others treated his mother like an obligation rather than a person. That afternoon, Serafina sat quietly at the table near the window while Cashin discussed business with the restaurant manager. She looked elegant in a pale green dress, her silver hair carefully tied back. But there was sadness in her eyes that made Maricel pause. When Maricel approached the table with the menu, she initially began speaking normally. Serafina smiled politely but did not respond. Maricel noticed the small hearing device behind her ear and realized what was happening. Instead of speaking louder, she slowly placed the menu on the table and reached into the pocket of her apron. She pulled out a pen. Serafina watched curiously as Maricel wrote on a small notepad, asking what she would like to order. The elderly woman's eyes widened. She took the pen and wrote something back. Maricel smiled. Then something unexpected happened. Maricel placed the pen down and lifted both hands. Her fingers moved gently and naturally. She was signing. Not perfectly, not like someone who had spent years interpreting professionally, but enough to communicate. Serafina's hand immediately flew to her chest. Across the restaurant, Cashin stopped speaking. He stared at Maricel as though he had just witnessed something impossible. Maricel did not notice him. Her attention was entirely on Serafina. The elderly woman began signing rapidly, tears gathering in her eyes. Maricel answered carefully, sometimes pausing because she had forgotten a sign. Their communication was simple at first. Serafina wanted to know how Maricel had learned sign language. Maricel explained that her father had been deaf. The smile disappeared from her face. Her father had taught her when she was a child. He used to say that hands could speak when voices could not. He had worked as a mechanic and never earned much money, but he had been the gentlest person Maricel had ever known. After he died unexpectedly, Maricel had stopped signing regularly. She had forgotten how much she missed it. Serafina looked at her for a long moment. Then she signed something that made Maricel's eyes fill with tears. She said that she had missed being spoken to like a normal person. For the first time in months, Serafina was not being treated like an elderly woman who needed to be managed. She was simply being heard. Cashin watched from several steps away. Something inside him broke. He remembered the countless dinners where his mother had sat silently while people spoke around her. He remembered telling himself that he was protecting her by hiring the best staff, buying the best medical equipment, and arranging everything money could buy. But suddenly he realized that he had never asked what she actually wanted. He had been taking care of her without truly being with her. Maricel eventually returned to her duties, unaware that Cashin was still watching her. Later that afternoon, Serafina requested that Maricel stay near her table. The manager hesitated because Maricel had other tables, but Cashin quietly instructed him to allow it. For the next 2 hours, something extraordinary happened. Serafina laughed. She signed stories about her childhood. Maricel responded with stories about her father. They discovered they both loved old music, gardening, and handwritten letters. Serafina even told Maricel that she had once danced in the rain with her husband during their first year of marriage. Cashin stood nearby, pretending to read messages on his phone. But he wasn't reading anything. He was watching his mother laugh. That evening, when the restaurant was almost empty, Cashin approached Maricel. She immediately became nervous. She assumed she had done something wrong. But instead of criticizing her, Cashin asked how she knew sign language. Maricel explained that her father had taught her, and that after his death she had barely used it. Cashin looked toward his mother. His voice became softer as he admitted that he had spent years trying to make Serafina happy but had never realized how lonely she had become. Maricel told him that sometimes people did not need someone to solve their problems. Sometimes they only needed someone willing to sit beside them and understand. Cashin did not answer. He simply nodded. The next morning, Maricel received an unexpected call from the restaurant manager. She was being dismissed. No explanation was given. Her stomach dropped. She had barely slept the night before because she was already worried about rent. Losing the job meant losing almost everything. She arrived at the restaurant confused and frightened. The manager refused to meet her eyes. He told her that someone from the Vale family had complained. Maricel assumed it was Cashin. Her heart sank. She had thought their interaction had meant something. She left the restaurant carrying her small bag, fighting tears as she walked beneath the bright afternoon sun. She did not see the black sedan parked across the street. Inside it, Cashin sat beside his mother. Serafina was furious. She had discovered that one of the senior employees had deliberately arranged Maricel's dismissal because he believed a waitress communicating with a wealthy guest's family member was inappropriate and could damage the restaurant's reputation. Cashin had fired the manager immediately. Then he asked his mother whether she wanted him to find Maricel. Serafina signed one sentence. Find her. Cashin found Maricel 2 days later outside a small neighborhood grocery store. She was carrying 2 paper bags and trying to calculate whether she had enough money left for dinner. Cashin stepped out of his car. Maricel froze. She thought he had come to tell her that she was permanently blacklisted from the restaurant. Instead, he apologized. Not the polite apology of a billionaire who expected forgiveness. A real apology. He told her that she had done nothing wrong. He explained that his mother had personally demanded that Maricel be brought back. Maricel looked stunned. Cashin then revealed something even more unexpected. His mother wanted Maricel to work with her permanently, not as a servant, but as a companion and communication assistant. Maricel immediately refused. She said she did not have the qualifications. Cashin told her that his mother did not care about certificates. She cared about being understood. Still, Maricel hesitated. She was afraid. She had spent her entire life believing that people like Cashin lived in a world where someone like her would never belong. Then Serafina appeared. She had come herself. She walked slowly toward Maricel and took both of her hands. With trembling fingers, she signed that Maricel had given her something money never could. A voice. Not a spoken voice. A human connection. Maricel began crying. Serafina pulled her into a gentle embrace. Cashin looked away for a moment, unable to hide the tears gathering in his eyes. From that day forward, Maricel became part of the Vale household. But what happened next surprised everyone. She did not simply become Serafina's companion. She became family. Maricel helped Serafina reconnect with old friends. She encouraged her to return to gardening. She created an evening tradition where Serafina wrote memories from her life while Maricel recorded them. Eventually, those memories became a book about love, loss, and surviving the silence. Cashin changed too. He began eating dinner with his mother instead of working through every meal. He learned basic sign language. At first, he was terrible at it. His hands moved awkwardly, and Serafina laughed whenever he made mistakes. But he kept practicing. One evening, nearly a year after Maricel had first entered the restaurant, the three of them sat together in the garden beneath the warm afternoon sun. Cashin looked at his mother and signed slowly. He told her that he was sorry. Sorry for confusing protection with presence. Sorry for believing that money could replace time. Sorry for letting her feel alone. Serafina stared at him for several seconds. Then she touched his cheek. She signed that she had never needed a perfect son. She had only needed her son. Cashin broke down. Maricel watched as mother and son embraced beneath the golden sunlight. For a man who owned skyscrapers, companies, private jets, and more money than he could ever spend, Cashin had finally discovered the one thing wealth could never purchase. Time. Attention. And love. Months later, Maricel opened a small community center funded anonymously by Cashin and Serafina. It offered free sign language classes to families with deaf children and elderly people who had lost their hearing. On the wall was a simple sentence Maricel had learned from her father as a child: sometimes hands speak what the heart has been trying to say all along. The center became successful. But Maricel never forgot the frightened young waitress she had once been. Every afternoon, she sat near the window and watched sunlight spread across the room. And whenever someone walked through the door feeling invisible, she made sure they were seen. Because she had learned something that changed her life forever. Kindness does not always arrive as a grand gesture. Sometimes it is a pen placed gently on a table. Sometimes it is a pair of hands willing to speak. Sometimes it is simply staying when everyone else has walked away. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who believes in kindness, and subscribe to Kindness Legacy. Your support helps these stories reach people who may need a little hope today. And before you leave, please comment: kindness speaks every language. Let those words be your special reminder that compassion can cross every barrier, even when words cannot. Because on that ordinary afternoon, a shy waitress thought she was only serving a wealthy family. She never imagined that one small act of understanding would give a lonely woman her voice back, bring a broken son closer to his mother, and transform an uncertain young woman's life forever. And perhaps that is the most beautiful lesson of all. Sometimes, the person we think we are helping is actually the person who is saving us.